Hello and welcome. We are kicking off. I've been very excited for this day. We're kicking off the very first in our series called Architecting Scale with Predictable Success. And I cannot tell you how excited I am about what you guys are all going to learn over the course of the next 12 months. Let's take a quick peek. Each month we're going to be diving into one of the 13 imperatives that we've discovered are the essential building blocks for predictable success in any organization, whether it be a business, a church, a school, a cause-based organization, or even a governmental unit. It's all there. And we're going to open up our actual playbook that we use each and every day to teach you how to architect scale. This is like a master's degree in achieving and sustaining predictable success, but this is in no way academic. Instead, you're going to find that each session is going to be immensely practical. You're going to be able to actually use everything that you've learned. You're going to leave each session powered up and ready to use, what you've learned to get your organization on the growth track and moving forward. And today it starts with a tremendously pressing concern all across the business world. And that is, how do you scale up your organizational effectiveness? Now, to cover that, we're going to talk about hiring. We're going to approach this item all the way over here on the right side of the predictable success scalability matrix. Let me give you a quick run through of what we're going to talk about throughout today's session. First, we're going to show you the special role of hiring as it relates to helping an organization sustain predictable success. You see, hiring is actually so much more important than filling an opening in your org chart. The future success of your organization is at stake. Second, we're going to get super practical as we walk you through the 5 specific key factors or strategies that will allow you to scale your hiring effectiveness. And then third, we're going to give you what you all came for today and show you how to actually use predictable success to build your organization faster than ever. Now, you have to buckle up. This usually takes about 8 hours, and we're packing it all into about 45 minutes with some Q&A. So get ready and let's go ahead and jump in. Now, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A box here in Zoom, the 2 speech bubble windows. And what I'd like you to do is go ahead and just jot down your questions on a piece of paper or notepad or on your computer. And then as we get close to our Q&A time, I'll let you know. And you can use the Q&A box for any unanswered questions, comments, or observations when we reach that point. I'll quickly introduce myself for those of you who do not know me. My name is Scott Ritzheimer. I'm the founder and CEO of Scale Architects, the organization that Les and I launched this year to help organizations like you bring predictable success to your world. Now, before launching Scale Architects, I helped start nearly 20,000 new businesses, and I consulted with some incredible $100+ million organizations and nonprofits that existed on 5 different continents. And we did all of that using the predictable success model. Now, my team and I, we were constantly challenged by hiring, and what took us years to learn the hard way, you're going to learn here today in less than an hour. Thanks to this guy right here, Les McEwen. Les is the president and CEO of Predictable Success. He's a leading advisor on leadership, organizational development. He's started over 40 companies in his own right before turning 35, I think it was, and was a founding partner of an incubation consulting company that advised on the creation and growth of hundreds of organizations worldwide. He really genuinely knows what he's doing, guys. Les advises CEOs and senior leaders today of organizations on how to achieve scalable and sustainable growth. His clients range from large family-owned businesses to Fortune 100 companies that include Harvard University, American Express, T-Mobile, and United Technologies, the Pella Corporation, and even Chevron. Quick idea of where all of this is coming from. Les has put together 4 books. He's the mastermind behind Predictable Success. And if you want to find out more about Predictable Success or anything that we talk about today, it's going to be in one of these books. We'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Now, each of these books is well regarded in the business community with feedback, and praise from folks like Alan Mulally, the former CEO and president of Ford, Marshall Goldsmith, best-selling author of Succession, Are You Ready? And What Got You Here Won't Get You There, and also Michael Port, the best-selling author of Book Yourself Solid. So that's enough introducing. What I'd like to do now is hand it over to Les. Les, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate it. Such a pleasure to be working with you and all of the great scale architects, a number of whom I know are on our call today. And I'm going to underline something that you just said, which is in the time that we have available, we're going to go through an awful lot of material, but towards the end, I'm going to show you how you can very quickly triage what we go through and apply just what is most important for you. But even those aspects that I share with you here that you're thinking that's not something that we've got a problem with right now, I guarantee you want to keep the slides, keep the notes, because you're going to hit them as bumps in the road on the way down. So let's just talk about where we're headed here. What's the ultimate goal of this hiring imperative, as we call it? Why is it so important to get it right? Well, let me start by telling you what it's not. It's not about getting functional competence, which sounds like a weird thing to say. Am I saying we should be hiring functionally incompetent people? No, what I'm saying is a large part of what I'm going to be sharing with you today helps you make a mind shift, a really important one. There are two key mind shift changes, and this is the first one. And it's away from feeling under enormous pressure to make sure that the person you hire can actually do the job that you're hiring them for, and allows you to put a process in place, which we're going to show you, which makes that a hygiene factor. It's a given. If you work the process that we share with you, you're going to get people who are functionally competent. That will come with the territory. You use this process. What it's all about is getting your folks to do something that goes much beyond just a core skill. You're hiring a salesperson or a sales manager or a general counsel. We want to get you to the position where you just know from your hiring process they're going to be able to do those jobs, but there's something else that they've got to be able to do, and that's take part in high quality team-based decision making. Now that might sound incredibly mundane, boring, it's clunky, it's not sharp, but that's what getting an organization into this stage we call predictable success is all about. Now, we don't have time on this particular live stream to go through all of the reasons why high quality team-based decision making is so important, but you're going to see many of them in the content that we're going to share with you. Let me leave it by saying this. When you get to this stage of growth, this peak of the predictable success life cycle, where you really can scale your organization. And by the way, we're talking to all of you there today, whether you're running a for-profit, manufacturing service business, not-for-profit, faith or cause-based organization, all of these principles apply across the board. You get to this stage, which we call predictable success. One of the key things that you've got to do is you've got to manage a complicated, complex organization. That means getting people to make high quality decisions. You can't do it all by yourself anymore. And so we're hiring on top of functional competence, going to show you how to make that a given. And we're hiring people who will work with your team, your people, taking you towards your common goals. What we're trying to get, where we're trying to get the needle here is to a particular type of leadership. And this isn't just for the named leaders in your organization. In my book, Do Lead, I make the point, everybody in your organization should be able to lead from anywhere they are. Leadership is simply any act that gets two or more people closer to their common goals. It can be a momentary thing. It doesn't have to be somebody with a title who leads. You want every single person, from your janitor to your CEO, to be able to create random acts of leadership in getting you and your organization towards your common goals. And part of that means getting a needle into the right place. And it's coming away from what works so very, very well in the early growth stages. It's what I call heroic leadership, the diving catch, asking forgiveness, not permission, being the superstar, just going the extra mile all of the time. Those are all great things, and they're perfectly right for a smaller growing organization. The problem is when we get complex, it becomes unscalable. We can't have everybody just making diving catches all over the field of the pitch. It doesn't work. We've got to begin to bring some degree of consolidation, coordination, standardization. We've got to be able to get together in groups and make high quality decisions, do diving catches in teams and groups. And moving away from or not getting into what we see in very big old clunky organizations where we've got protective leadership. Everybody's protecting everything. We want to show you how to get to this stage where you have what we call synergistic leadership. That's leadership that builds on systems and processes to produce innovation and scalability. Gets you that J curve if you're looking at my hands while I'm doing this. And hiring is a core first step. When you're hiring, that's like the spigot coming into the tank or the pool that is your organization. Anything new comes from hiring. That's where the business or your faith or cause-based organization, that's how it changes. It's because of the people you're bringing in. Now, when you look at how hiring happens in small, fast-growing organizations, typically we've got this hire fast, fire slow mentality. We hire really, really quickly because we know when we hire somebody, if they've showed the right attitudes and behaviors at the point of hiring, if they've got some skills deficiencies, we know we can probably mentor them, coach them, bring them up to what we want them to do, because they'll be around. We'll be able, by osmosis, to show them how to be better at what they're doing. And we tend in fast growth organizations, when we're smaller, not all the time, but we tend to fire slowly. We know these people. They're often, we start out hiring people we know, friends, colleagues, family. And so we hire fast, we fire slow. In the older, crankier organizations, bigger, more bureaucratic, we're much more likely to be hiring slowly and firing slowly, right? We're taking forever to hire people, and it takes forever for anybody to ever get fired for anything. What we're looking for in predictable success is to hire slower, not slow per se, but to take a little more effort in doing it in order to very infrequently be needing to fire anybody. I'm not saying it never happens, of course it does. But if we get our hiring process right, we get the right people who not only have the functional capabilities, they also fit, and we fire much less frequently. There's a highly proactive, success-focused hiring process that we're going to show you. Now, what's involved in getting those people? I want to cut to the chase in a sense and say everything that I'm about to share with you, I'm going to share it with you in a few minutes, 5 specific things that will make your hiring process deliver all that we've just talked about so far. The core of what you're looking for is at the heart of the predictable success scalability matrix. It's what you're looking at here. You want to hire owners. You want to hire people who own their role, own their job. Many of us, we've got people, we're working with people, and they're renters. Now, I'm not making a judgment here. I'm not speaking ill of people, but there are folks who come in, they want their paycheck, they come in, they rent the job, they do an okay job, and they leave. There are other people who own that job. They look after it, they improve it, they make it better. Think about the difference in the way a renter looks after a car compared to an owner. You've heard the phrase, nobody ever washed a rental car. Actually true. I actually know a couple of people who take kits with them and wash their rental cars, but that's a different story. But you know there's a distinction between somebody who owns their job and someone who rents them. And we're going to help you find the tools and equipment that you need in order to hire owners. Now, what happens if you don't get this right? I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but I just want to show you the negatives, because you'll be beginning, if you're on this webinar, it's likely you're beginning to experience one or more of these. First of all, you're constantly having to go back into the teams and groups that your folks have got clustered around in, working either cross-functionally or within their own functional areas, and sort of re-educate, rethink, how do we make decisions here? You're constantly sort of pushing to get some sort of a consistent way to make sure they're making high quality decisions. And there's a debilitating pressure to fragment decision making. Instead of there being a cohesive approach in the organization as a whole, where if I see somebody in this team, if I'm in marketing and I see somebody in sales making a decision, I have comfort in what they're doing because I know they're bringing a comprehensive approach to decision making. If we don't get our hiring right, we bring in I'm sure you've seen this, I say it over and over again, we hire like a big dog, a new big dog in the organization, and they unwittingly just take us back into whitewater or push us forward into treadmill. They take us out of the predictable success state that we're in because they don't bring with them the fit that we need to stay in predictable success. There's little or no cohesion and execution. Sometimes we can just look more like an all-star team. You've seen those all-star teams? We've got like fantastic football players or soccer players, and individually in their own teams, they're magnificent. You put them together in an all-star team, because they're all-stars, they don't play well together. And so the whole team ethos begins to fragment. We get confusion in our direct reports. We begin to fragment into silos, and we ultimately end up with high turnover. Poor hiring breeds high turnover, which means you do more hiring, which is still poor, and so it becomes an amplifier. We're going to break that down. The 5 key factors I'm going to share with you in a moment, they're going to do a specific thing, and I'm coming to them literally in the next slide. They're going to do a very specific thing. They're going to move you across a spectrum. And the spectrum that we typically start in a younger, growing organization, when we just start hiring for the first time, hiring is sort of like a probation hearing. You know, we have this person in front of us and we ask them a bunch of questions and we're never too sure. And let's be bluntly honest, often we end up hiring the least poor candidate. And that sounds pretty awful, sort of scathing. I don't mean it that way. It's just that we know we've got a job to do. We desperately need somebody to come in and do this. We can't go through another 3 months of it. So nobody really fits the bill perfectly. But Joanne is as close as we're going to get. Let's hire Joanne, even though we sort of know she probably hasn't got what it takes. And after 8 months, we got a difficult separation for everybody, including poor Joanne. And we got to start that all over again. It's sort of like, you know, we go through the hiring process and then we stick our finger in the air and think, oh, okay, I hope it's going to happen. And also, the hiring activity is typically an event. It's an event. I've got an open vacancy. Shoot. I've got to. This is so distracting. I've got to turn around and look at this whole hiring process. It's an irritating event. And this is the second bandwidth, mind perspective change that I want to suggest to you. One of the single most important things that you can do in terms of changing your perspective is to stop thinking about hiring as an irritant, as a sort of an upending of the status quo. Now, not everybody does think that, but when we're busy growing our organizations, it feels like that. Like we just want a great team and let's just get on with it. And oh, I've lost somebody or I need somebody new and I've got to hire. It's a pain in the neck. I want you to see that if you're committed to growing your organization, you're going to be hiring for the rest of your days. You're always going to be hiring. And you best get as good at hiring as you are at your core function. Say this to leaders all the time. Here's the core thing you do, whether it's manufacturing plastic extruded bottles or running a church. There's the core thing you do. You've got to be good at that. And you've got to be really, really good at hiring if you're committed to growth. You've got to be as good at hiring as you are at your core thing, because that's the direct result of growing is you're going to need new people all the time. So we're going to move you away from this sort of visceral finger in the air to a behavioral proof of talent. Well, what's going to do all of that? I want you to grab the concept of a golf swing in your mind when I go through the 5 key areas that I'm going to share with you. And it doesn't matter you've never played golf. If you've seen anybody with a golf club, you'll understand exactly what I'm going to say. There's nothing to do, believe me, with being good at being a golfer. You don't need to know that. Here are the 5 things that we're going to work through. Now, before I go through each of them, I just want to repeat something. Our workshop on this whole thing is typically a day. I will then frequently, with the organizations and the clients I have for whom hiring is a really pressing imperative, I will often be back teaching any one or all of these 5 for another day or 2 days. These are not things that you can just fix in a moment, but what you can do here in today's live stream is you can see, and I'll show you how to do it when we're coming towards a close. I'll show you how to exactly pinpoint which of these you do need to work on, and I'll have given you the starting points to make that happen. So think about somebody with a golf club. They're going to tee up a ball and knock it 300 yards down the fairway? Well, there are 5 fluid parts to that golf swing. First thing is, got to set it up. You've got to tee the ball up. I'm going to talk about teeing up. I'm going to talk about a very specific thing we call about it moving from heads to hats. I'll explain that in a moment or two. Then once you've teed the ball up, you take your golf club back. It's a backswing. You will not get any traction without a backswing. You try it, go out there, whether it's tennis or golf, and try to make the ball go any distance without a backswing, isn't going to work. The backswing, that's sort of pulling the club up. We're going to talk about building a hiring brand. The downswing, coming back to the ball again, that's all about sourcing great candidates. We're going to talk about that. Then there's the point of impact. And this is the interviewing, hiring part. This is where we actually do the interaction with our potential candidates. And often that's the only part folks are thinking about when we're talking about hiring, as you're already seeing a really grooved hiring process is much more than just that bit. And then finally, the bit that I see missing so often is follow through. And we're going to talk about the role of onboarding and orientation. And again, I want you to do it. You can try it yourself. You try to make a ball go any distance in any moving ball sport, like whether it's golf, tennis, soccer, whatever. You try to hit the ball any distance without follow through, you'll realize it doesn't work. So those are the 5 key areas that we're going to look at. First of all, what do I mean by this? This is the teeing up stage, this heads to hats. This is about having absolute clarity around what you're hiring for. Now, many of you may be past this stage, in which case just note it down and move on. Many of you will be sort of grasping towards this, and some of you have got it ahead of you. And here's what this is. When we're a young, growing organization, we have what I call a heads-based org chart. What a role is whatever the current incumbent does, right? I go into a business and fun, and I say, what does a sales manager do here? And the CEO says, oh, Jordy, come over here. Tell the man what you do. He wants to know what you do, because Jordy's the sales manager. So what a sales manager does there is what Jordy does. What you've got to do if you're scaling your organization is you've got to move to a hats-based perception, the hat that people wear, not the head of the current incumbent, so that you know precisely what, for each of the key roles in your organization, what the business or the not-for-profit needs in that role. You've got to sit down and define, what do we need for a sales manager? Forget about what Jordy's current skill set is. What do we need? And repeat that for each of your key roles. Now, that's going to have a couple of implications. It means that when you start to produce that clarity around frankly, the job specifications, I try not to use that phrase because it's so boring and drives everybody asleep, but it is here in the context of hiring a crucially important document, as we're going to see echoed throughout a number of our key points. What that typically means is we end up working in not just the job specifications. You will end up saying to yourself, if that's, to take my example, if that's what a sales manager is supposed to do here, I need that sales manager to be reporting to such and such, or I've got to get them into this meeting, or they've got to push this information around. And so we start to look at the org chart. Now, I'm not suggesting some, tear your eyes out, awful, endless, rolling analysis of your org chart and your job specifications. All I'm saying is you've got to get the key roles to start with, the key roles in your organization, really sharpen up on a hats-based understanding of what those roles do, and then look at your org chart and say, am I giving the communication and reporting channels to that position that are needed for them really to operate? Because mostly every organization that hits the stage we call whitewater, they arrive with this spaghetti of an org chart and reporting structures and not even any job descriptions that has just built up over time. And it was fine while it was, but now it's not. So we're going to have to really hammer those out. Now, if you're at the point where you've already done that and you've got pretty clear job descriptions and a pretty clear org chart, where you may find yourself being pushed to next, or again, you might already be there, is that typically leads you into the world of KPIs, key performance indicators, whatever you want to call them, metrics to drive performance. And something we call service level agreements, getting key internal customers to understand what they expect of each other. But for now, for what we're talking about today, you can see why we could do a whole day just on this. I want you just to think about the job specs for your key roles. Are they heads-based? It's what Jordy does, or are they hats-based? So that's our first of our 5 key factors. The second one, and if we're going to take our golf analogy, this is where we start the backswing, is something that is in the realm of important but not urgent, and therefore it rarely gets the attention that it deserves. It's about building your hiring brand. Now, I'll explain in a little minute what I mean by that, but just to sit with this urgent versus the important thing. What often happens with what should be a hiring process is that the urgency of the need to fill the role, now I got to get somebody, that is urgent. It's also important. It's urgent and important, so it gets attention. Filling a pipeline for future potential needs, hiring needs, is, when you think about it, intellectually clearly important, but it doesn't ever feel urgent. I want to suggest to you, if you're committed to scaling, this needs to get on your radar. And what do I mean? It's essentially building a hiring brand. You, I'm sure, have a brand, and I'm talking to you, the folks that are running your cause or faith-based charities, your not-for-profits, you've got brands too. You've got a brand out there for your product or your service. You need a hiring brand. You need to be known in your local community or in your actual demographic as somebody who's hiring and who's good to work for. And, there are whole institutes and organizations set aside to measure that, stuff like best places to work and the best small company in USA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of that has, over the years, sort of taken the concept of just me with my local chiropractors building a hiring brand. Isn't that just for big companies? No, it's not. It's for any organization. And the way to recognize this is to recognize, the way to work on this is to recognize that everything you do out there builds your reputation as somebody who's either a good or a bad employer. Let me ask you this. If you were thinking, for example, if you're in the bed and breakfast business, and there's a local bed and breakfast advertising for a manager, where's the very first place you would go to see whether you want to interview with them? I'd like to suggest it's probably Yelp or whatever the local referral opinion site is that you use, because there you're going to hear the truth. And many of you be familiar with Glassdoor and other specific websites that rate employers publicly. Now, you can put your thumb on the scale by just recognizing that no matter what size your organization is, whether you are just the local chiropractor or you're a 200 outlet coffee chain, you get to determine what your brand is. And the areas that you want to look at are not only your online presence and your website, but that's a great starting point. If you're going to take hiring seriously, anybody coming to your website should be able to go directly to a dedicated page that talks about what it's like to work with you. You want to look at your social media footprint. Are you consistently putting out, we're always hiring comments? What about review sites, as I've already mentioned? Are you interacting there to make sure that people get a good view of you? What about your local community engagement? What about your current staff? Do your current employees know, maybe, are you even paying like a referral fee if they refer somebody that you're going to employ? Many of the best hires are people referred by others because their current employees know you. They know whether there's going to be a fit or not. And then there's the last place of all, which is the job postings and the job posting sites. Obviously, you want to get your LinkedIn profile, your company's LinkedIn profile, really hammering on the point that you are a great place to work. I'm not saying that you should lie about anything. You should say what you feel comfortable about saying. So teeing it up, you've got to have a clear idea of what you're hiring towards. That's the heads to hats process. You've got to build your hiring brand, and I realize how fast I'm going through a big concepts, and I'm happy to go deeper in Q&A when we're done here. The third thing that we're going to look at is the area that I find most executives struggle with most, which is, where do I get the people? Where do I get the folks to come? Well, we've already looked at one key thing, which is to build your hiring brand. You know, if every email you have is a signature, it's got a little SIG file at the bottom, and it says, always looking for good people, click here. If you've got half a day a month just spent on actively massaging your employer brand, you're going to begin to get unsolicited applications. And that's a glorious thing. In their heyday, back when they were the place to work, and I'm sure it's now, might still be Facebook, but I remember Google were at one point getting close to 15,000 unsolicited job applications globally every single day. Now, you're a local chiropractor or a two-campus church, you don't need 15,000. But if you were getting 2 or 3 a month, that begins to build your pipeline. There are other things that you can do to help you build that pipeline, though. And just to be clear, what we're talking about here gets at the heart of hiring the best people, and it's this. Statistically, at your point of need, the folks that are in the market at that point, the folks who are either unemployed or looking around, statistically, your best candidate is almost certainly not there. And if you don't build a pipeline, if you don't do what we're talking about here in our context slide, if you're not out there trying to build a pipeline, like a virtual drawer you can open with those applications in there, you're limited to whoever's on the market in the brief period of time when you need that particular skill. The people you want are perfectly happy. They're working somewhere and performing at a high level in other organizations. That's why you need the drumbeat of constantly saying, hey, I'm here. We want best JavaScript coders we can get. And I've heard you're fantastic. I know it might not work for you right now, but hey, I'm waving, I'm here, and I'm popping up every now and again. And don't forget, you're ever thinking of moving. That's why it's so important to really get engaged with folks who aren't looking for a job, because they're the best candidates. Technically called passive candidates, not out there in the marketplace. That's who we're trying to attract. And what can we do to go get them? Well, you can start thinking about your internal employee base. What about building career pathing? It's a really tough thing for smaller growing organizations to do. It's really tough. There's a no man's land when you're moving out of being just a funky, hip startup, and then you get a little bit bigger, and you think about those very large organizations that can do career pathing and move people around, do all that sort of stuff. But at some point, you've got to begin to say, well, you know what? I'm going to start losing our best people if I don't provide them with better opportunities. So you can start looking internally. As we've already talked about, you can begin to just get your name out in front of passive candidates. LinkedIn has just got better and better and better in that regard. It was one of those things I thought was going to have had its day, but I do believe it's genuinely doing it. And I hate to say this because I'm not a big Microsoft fan. And when they bought it, I thought they were going to kill LinkedIn dead. But I see it doing great things for people who are just saying, hey, if you're in the extruded water bottle business, love to have you come talk to us, and keep your face and name details in front of those passive candidates. Nurtured candidates, what I call nurtured candidates, I'm really thinking here about your, what we call in predictable success, your T1 or T2 roles. That's your C-suite, your top level decision-making team, and your manager group that sits underneath them. What I want to suggest to you is sit down and start electronically or in writing, start keeping a dream list. It might be 2 people. It might be 15 people. It might be 50 people, actual people you've met who impress you or who who you want to nurture, and just have virtual coffee with them, have real coffee with them, depending on where you live right now. Spend time, send them an article, send them a book, send them tickets to something. ask them to come see your business, invite them in and tell them, just say, I'd love you to come and have a look around. I don't know if you're ever thinking of moving, but I'd love you to have us on your mind. You're really targeting the people that you want. That might sound like an awful lot of work, but to get the top level team that you want, it's well worth it. One of the things that some organizations do really, really well, Anderson Consulting, what are they called now? Accenture do this really well. Goldman Sachs do this really well. But I know many smaller businesses do this really well too. They build a fantastic alumni network. And what do I mean by that? I mean, they bring people in, and when people decide to move on, as they do, they don't see that as a defeat. They have a separation, as the HR folks call it, that's friendly and supportive. And they say to them, look, when you're out there, if you see anybody you think would be good for us, let us know. I have an engineering company in Southern Ohio, and they are brilliant at this. They have engineers working all over North America and frequently getting referrals back of people that they spot who they think would really be a great job for JB. So that's our third. It's a downswing, is effective sourcing. So we've set it up, teed it up, done the backswing, building our brand. We're doing great sourcing now, bringing in good candidates. And now we get to where the rubber hits the road, or the golf club face hits the ball, to be more precise in our analogy here. And that's the actual interviewing process. And by golly, if I could repeat, I really don't want to sound too boring, but I'm going to spend 4 minutes here on something that is an enormous thing to get right. And it's really important to get it right. But you want to take the principles that I'm about to share with you, use the little exercise that I'm going to give you at the end, identify the aspects of this that you need to work on, and then you need to train your people to do this. Hiring is so often, as I said early on, it's a hit and hope. It's a put your finger in the air and see what way the wind's blowing. It's sort of a, oh, I hope it's going to work out. It's the least worst candidate, and let's just hope this works out. If you get this right, you can move away from all of that to get to the stage of having clinical proof that a candidate has the functional skills that you want. I want you to think about the hiring process, this part here, the actual interviewing process. It should be a process, not just an event of meeting one person or two people or three people one time. The process has got to be like going through an MRI. I don't mean they're physically lying there, but metaphorically, as an organization, you should be able to run your candidates through your interview process and come out with a scan that tells you, do they have what it takes for them to do the job that you want them to do? Remember, I said right at the start, you've got to get to the point where functional competency is a given. And this is where that happens here in the interview process. And I want to make one overarching sort of a sweeping generalization, but it's about 80% true. And it's this: you've got to move away from talky to show me. That's essentially it. Most poor interviewing processes are a monologue at worst. Let me tell you all about us. Oh, you remind me of me 20 years ago. Let's go. A dialogue maybe, but a dialogue that's sort of all over the shop. I get, when somebody tells me they have a favorite interview question, I think, oh, great. So you think there's a magic question that will tell you whether anybody that you're talking to has got the ability to be a car mechanic, pastor, music pastor, clinician in a laboratory? Great question. Doesn't work that way. You've got to get to the point where you are clearly establishing whether somebody can do what you want them to do. And the way to do it is to get them to show you. Now, what does that mean? It means, first of all, you want to know what those things are. You've got to get what I call the must-haves and the must-dos. This takes about an hour and 15 minutes to 2 hours for each key role. You only got to do it once, maybe revise it a little while. But you take the sales manager role. It takes about an hour and 15 minutes, maybe a little longer, to sit down and say, really, when we boil it all down, what are the 5 things that somebody must have in order to succeed in this job? And what are the 5 things that they must do to succeed in this job? It might be to hit a target, hit a goal. One of the must-dos, one of the must-haves is they must have communication skills. And why does it take that an hour and 15 to 2 hours as opposed to 10 minutes? Because it's a sales manager job. I've been in the sales manager job many times. Surely I can do it in 10 minutes. It's because we don't really define the word must. And we end up hiring for nice to haves or good to haves. We end up taking people in on the good to have basis while they clearly didn't have a must have or a must do. So you've got to define your must haves and your must do's. You've got to have panel interviews. In other words, not one person talking to this individual, because they will end up, you have one interviewer, they will end up getting overwhelmed with personal biases one way or the other. So you need panel interviews using behaviorally based questions, not what animal would you be in the zoo, but what would you do in this situation where a customer told you they didn't want our product because of X? What would you do? Behaviorally based questions. But most importantly, above all else, you've got to invest time on getting role plays, scenario testing, you're hiring a controller, get them to balance a ledger. You're hiring a payroll clerk, get them to run a dummy payroll. Do it, sit there, get them to fire up the software. There are some roles that's a little more conceptualized to do. Let's say a chief marketing officer. Give them a case study. Plenty of great case studies out there for chief marketing CMOs. What would you do with this spend of, pick your number, 50,000, 500,000, 5 million, whatever it is, to get us into this market? Get them to do the thing they're there to do. If they're there to be salespeople and hit a sales target, you want to know, do you hit targets? Get them to bring their W-2 in. Get them to come and show you what their earnings were last year and how much of it was their bonus. What aspect of their commission did they earn and what did they not? This has got to be real. This has got to be an MRI, because you want clinical proof that this person functionally can do what we want them to do. Our final area, and it's a bit where, for totally understandable reasons, we can do all of this pretty well and then it all goes to pot, is we bring people in and then we let them hang. Now, there's something which I call the expectation curve, which I'm not going to go into here, but essentially, to summarize it real quickly, every new employee comes in with a reasonably high expectation that things are going to go well and this is going to be a great job. And it's based on what I call uninformed optimism. And after a week or so, it starts to plunge every time. And at about various business to business, industry to industry, but about the 3-month mark, the employee hits a nadir, a down point, because they've been smacked upside the head by informed pessimism. And if you haven't provided any onboarding and ongoing assistance in a planned way to help them through that period, their mind can be permanently shifted into the state of, oh, I made a mistake. This isn't what I thought it would be. You've got to help them get back to informed realism. Informed realism. And you do that by having some sort of a structured onboarding program. Now, again, based on the time we've got, all I can do is show you the key elements of what would be in that. And here they are. A very clear understanding of what the 30-day, 60-day, and 90-day deliverables are. What do I mean by deliverables? What do they need to be able to do 30 days in, 60 days in, 90 days in? Some jobs that you hire for may have a longer run period before they can be 100% productive for you. Maybe for a very senior role, it might be 6 months before they're fully onboarded. But you need to set clear goals. By the end of 30 days, you should be able to use these bits of software, for our payroll clerk. After 60 days, you got to be able to run our payroll on your own without supervision. 90 days, you should be able to take on these additional responsibilities, whatever is right for the role that you have. Secondly, you've got to give folks an understanding of what you expect from them. It's amazing the degree to which we just drop people in and leave other folks to work out what's expected of them. We need to tell them that. So I expect you to take full ownership of the payroll function by the end of November. Just it's the deliverables turned into a discussion so that they're very clear of what you're expecting them to do with this. You've got to show them the processes, and then you've got to make sure they integrate with the right people. So your onboarding program, I don't want you to think about an onboarding program the way we think about huge organizations is like sausage machine. I'm talking about each key role that you bring in, just thinking through what do I need from this person, communicating that to them clearly, giving them the tools to do it, and then introducing them to and facilitating their early interactions with those key people. That will make a massive difference. So we have gone through a huge amount. We promised we'd get through it in 45 minutes, leave time for Q&A. By the way, now is a good time for you to start putting your Q&A in before I hand back to Scotty. But I also promised you at the outset that I wanted to give you something that you can do with your team, like literally take a half an hour to 45 minutes together and do what we call back in Ireland, picking the bones out of what I just went through. What are the things that you need to do? And just get this slide, sit down, and take everything that I've just shared and introduce it to your reality. You know, the reality of what's happening in your organization. You know, Mike Tyson's great saying, everybody has a plan till they're punched in the face. Well, every fantastic webinar presentation like the one that I've just given, I didn't mean that this sounds so boastful, is fine until it gets punched in the face with the reality of your business, your organization, your not-for-profit. So what I want to suggest you do is you just use these 5 straightforward questions to have a real world conversation. Don't pick on something that I went over that you thought was intellectually stimulating or quite clever or whatever it might be. Ask yourself these questions. Specifically, why and when does our hiring not work well? When does it work well? Then when does it not work well? And just think about that. Think about the times when, oh, that went pretty darn good. Well, why was that? Why did that particular active hiring work out pretty well? Why and when does it not work well? When we do it under pressure or when we're doing it for the sales function. I don't know what the answers will be for your organization, but you need to know that. And then make a list of what the 3 things are that you, from all that I've shared, that would be brand new to you. Here are 3 things we should start doing now. Maybe it's codifying heads to hats, codifying your jobs descriptions, whatever the 3 things are that are brand new that you should start. What has occurred to you as I've gone through this presentation that you're doing that you should stop? Maybe, for example, you're not even thinking about open positions until you need one, and you're not doing anything about building a pipeline in advance. So that's a good place for you to start. And finally, what's the main barrier or constraint on making consistently good hires? It might be just budget. Maybe you just can't afford the marketplace as it's currently constructed. But and I might not be able to fix that from what I'm just sharing with you. Although long-term planning for hiring can help you beat that because you're nurturing people over time. But it's good to know what the barrier is. Is it a lack of understanding about what it is clearly that you need for people to succeed? Is it rushing the hiring process? Let this exercise and these questions guide you back to the parts of the presentation that have worked for you. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Scotty to take us through to Q&A and the close of the webinar. Scotty.
Awesome. Thank you, Les. So good. There's so much in there to cover. I know that we've just opened up a whole can of worms for folks. And that's really what I want to talk about is what do you do with that? Les gave us a fantastic project that we can go through and work with your team. I'd highly recommend that you take them up and ask those 5 questions. You'll be amazed at how far that moves us downfield. But as many of you know and are feeling, hiring is a catch-22, right? You've not got the people that you need in place, which means you're doing their work and yours, and you're also having to do the work of hiring folks. And now we've talked about building a hiring process, which may be brand new for many of you. And so you're sitting there like, hey, I've got to fly the plane while I'm building it. And if that's you, then I just want to take a quick moment. We're not going to sell you anything. I just want to introduce a few resources, both free and paid, to help you scale your hiring effectiveness. The first one that we have here is the DIY resources. So we just have a mountain of resources that are available for you to do this yourself and to do it exceptionally well. We have more sessions like this. We have training courses that are online. There are blog articles out to wazoo, and you can find all of that at predictablesuccess.com. Also, we have coaching and consulting. As Les mentioned earlier, we have a cadre of scale architects who specialize in bringing predictable success to your organization. They've been trained in this approach and know it inside and out, and can dramatically increase the rate at which you can apply this and the confidence that you have that you're doing it right. And finally, one of the best ways that you can reach and sustain predictable success is to have someone right there who knows the way. And while a coach or consultant can help, sometimes you just want someone who's right there by your side every time you need them. And if that's you, you'd be happy to know we have a Train the Trainer program to do just that. I'll personally train one or more of your team members to become a predictable success guru right there in your organization. If any of that would be helpful, if you want to know about more of those resources, you can get all of it in one place. You can scan this with your phone or just go to scalearchitects.com/contact, and we'd be happy to help you out. You'll get a link in your email, so don't worry if you can't grab it here right now. I want to get to our Q&A. Before we do, two more quick resources I want to share. The first one is we have another one of these sessions. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this is part of a 12-part series on architecting scale in your organization. So in September, on September 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern, that's a Tuesday, we're going to teach you 5 ways to radically improve your organization's results through effective performance assessment. We're going to dig in deep on performance assessment. So if you want, registration opens today. You can head on over, scan the code, or go to predictablesuccess.com/2021-livestream-series. Again, you'll get a link for that as well. For those of you who purchased the full year and the full series in advance, great news, you will be automatically registered. Keep an eye on your inbox. We'll send you that information, but there's no action that you need to take on your part. If you have not registered for the full year, then and you've enjoyed what you've learned today, then by all means, head on over there. On that same link, you'll have the opportunity to register for the full year. You'll get access to all 12 recordings, all 12 live sessions, and you get a 50% discount on that. So do it while you still can. Finally, before we get to our Q&A here, we have 3 just free resources for you. The first one is a leadership styles quiz. We have not talked a whole lot about leadership styles here today, but you can use this quiz in your org chart process, in your heads to hats process, and even when reviewing job candidates. It's completely free. So check that out. Also, in an email, you'll get a link to download the first full chapter of Do Lead, Les's book on leadership. And finally, last but not least, you'll get a link to schedule a free consultation. We're genuinely here to help. And so if we can jump on a call, either Zoom or phone, and just help point you in the right direction, we'd love to do that. So we've got great content, we've got powerful resources, we've got free stuff, and now it's time for Q&A. So we'll have a moment here for any final questions that come in. Feel free to send them over, but Les, I'm going to go ahead and fire this first one your way. Are you ready? This is a great question, very common one. I get it all the time, and I know you've got a great answer for it. So can you touch on how you determine when you need to hire versus reacting post-need?
Determine how, how do I think through hiring in advance as opposed to waiting for an obvious, like,
that's right,
somebody leaves or the simplest thing to do, I want you to think about a Rubik's Cube here, folks. The simplest thing to do is to take about maybe a 2-hour exercise that's going to repay you for a long, long time to come, which is to pull into mind your growth goals, whatever they are, for say 3 years down the line. I want to be a $1 million business. I want to be $100 million business. I want to be $1 billion business. I want to be a 16 campus church, whatever it is. And doodle out, don't have to be perfect, but doodle out what you think your org chart will look like then, high level. First, probably 3 tiers. So very senior leadership, management team, and then maybe project leads and so forth. what sort of a structure would you need to manage that $150 million business, that 6-campus church, or whatever it is? And like I say, you're not going to get it 100% right, but you're going to be pretty accurate. Then what you've got to realize is that getting from here to there, it isn't one step. It's sort of like those word games, you start with one 4-letter word and then you change the individual letters to end up with a second 4-letter word. I actually feel that it's somewhat more complex than that. And it's often like what it feels like doing a Rubik's Cube, where you'll often turn the Rubik's Cube a number of times, knowing that when you get to a certain position, you're going to actually undo what you just did, because you're just trying to get one thing in the right place. The reason I'm sharing all of that is you need to take probably 2 stabs as to what that looks like from here to here. So this is my predictable success org chart, everything that I need to get me to where I want in, say, 3 years from now. What's the first step, then the next step that I need to make? And you're probably going to find 1 or 2 rules in the first step, 2 or 3 rules in the second step. So maybe, you're in a business that's eventually going to need a full-time social media manager. You don't need that now, but you're going to need it. Maybe you're going to have a CFO, and maybe it's pretty soon. It's going to be different from where you are. But you want to set those down and then just put a big red box around them, the ones that are to be hired. And then this is where the time comes in. You got to think through 2 to 3 metrics that will tell you when the time is to start the hiring process. So I'm just going to make stuff up here, but I'll give you an example. You're pretty much a one-man band. The time when you can't do all your social media in less than a half day a week, well, that's too much. So at that point, you need to start looking at hiring somebody. If you're a $15 million business and your CPA has got somebody parked semi-permanently just looking after your transactions, maybe that's the indicator that you need to go out and find, if not a CFO, at least a controller. So find the 2 or 3 key metrics for each of those key roles that you were going to need to put in place, but put the metrics in place in advance so that you're not sitting around, thinking, 6 months ago, I could have really done with a social media manager. That would have accelerated things very, very fast. Does that make sense?
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. One more question here for you. In the work that you've been doing with organizations, what are you noticing are new trends around hiring or challenges around hiring in the remote work COVID era?
It's all the stuff that most of us have been reading about. I think there's a grand resettlement going on of perceptions as to what is good or not so good in being together physically. And what I've noticed is that there are not that many people who are coming out of, fingers crossed that we're coming out of the lockdown phases with a sort of meh attitude to working from home. Most employees are coming out with I want to keep doing that, or I'm so glad that's over. Or there's a third version, which is I want to keep doing that a couple of days a week and come in a few days a week. So that's the big issue. And whereas I'm blanking on who the individual was, but was one of the big Wall Street operators, put a WSJ op-ed together a couple of days ago saying you just can't perform in the financial markets unless you're in the office individually. And he was talking about M&A and stuff like that. I just don't think that's going to fly. I don't think that's healthy. I think we've got to find out really what absolutely does need us to be together. Like, innovation tends to happen whenever we've got serendipity. And I see a lot of leadership teams just wanting to get together to shoot the breeze, and that's going to come back. But I think the days of just insisting everybody was physically on premises, unless you're running a bar or a restaurant, I don't think those are going to happen again.
Yeah. Excellent. And final question here. Do you have any tips or recommendations for hiring away from competition? You talked about passive employees being employed somewhere else. Many times they'll be with the competition. What tips or recommendations do you have for that?
Well, don't wait till the high performer. First of all, know who the high performers are in the competition. It's the people you want. Don't get fixated about who the competitor is. Obviously, you should know who the competitor is to go, but go find out somehow or other who the key high performers are in there, and just start that nurturing activity while they're still happy. What you don't want is somebody who has a blow up with their competitor and comes to you out of hubris and annoyance and to be perverse. That feels like a good win at the time that it happens, but it typically brings with it a whole bunch of bad attitudes. I would just be better than them as an employer brand, and be around. Just say, when you're thinking of moving, just give me a call.
Excellent. All right, folks, we are out of time. We've reached our hour mark. I just want to give you one last opportunity there. If there's any other questions that we've not answered, anything else we can help you with, head on over to scalearchitects.com/contact. And we look forward to seeing each and every one of you next month. Thanks so much.
Talk soon, folks.